What is going on, you guys? Welcome on in to the Only Swimming Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Wood.
And I'm Meredith.
And we would be amiss to say this is presented by Caribe Swim. And we're super excited to have you tuning in and watching our nightly podcast, once again called Only Swimming. You can be more a part of the Only Swimming community by heading over to onlyswimming.com and entering in your email address. It is completely for free, and that way you get notified on special content and a lot of epic stuff to help you in your learn to swim journey. So once again, head on over to onlyswimming.com, I'm sorry. And yeah, outside of that, we had a great time filming today.
So much fun.
And we've got two awesome episodes that are going to get launched this evening. Well, I guess three, including the podcast.
Wow, we've been busy today.
I know. And the first one, and the one that this podcast is centered around, that we're going to go into a little bit more detail, has to do with a comment by one of our subscribers. And they said, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but help, I can't get my feet up. And insinuating that when they are swimming, primarily on their front, they're having a hard time getting the legs up. And so what the video covered today was a three-part approach. The first part is, hey, how do you get your legs up in front floating? How do you get your legs up, part two, in back floating? And then how do you get your legs up in when we're doing forward propulsion? So what is one thing that you took away from the floating aspect of how we get our legs up to the top of the water from today's episode?
Well, it's not always about getting our legs up to the top, depending on your muscle to fat ratio, as well as whether or not you have any forward momentum.
Okay. So say a little bit more about the fat to muscle ratio, because that's probably, my guess is that people know a little bit, like inherently, on what that means. But as far as really understanding how it impacts them in the water, probably is worth going into a little bit more detail.
Yeah. So if you know that you have more muscle than you do fat, usually, people who are athletic, I've had insanely muscular legs since I can remember. The girls in the locker room used to call me Thunder Thighs, but it
really?
Yeah. But it wasn't because I was big. Well, I mean, I guess I had tree trunks for legs. And yeah, it made me a great competitive swimmer.
And freediver now.
Yeah, and freediver. But they burn up a lot of my oxygen, and they're heavy.
They're dense.
Yes, very dense. So not nearly as buoyant as the rest of my body. So they sink. Anytime I try to back float or front float, my legs just go down. And that's okay. So for anyone out there who knows that they have muscular legs, just know you're not going to achieve that perfect front float.
You might not.
Yeah. Right.
And this is very, very true. And it's a great point. So breaking that down just a little bit further, and we've taught bodybuilders, athletes, you name it, we've taught them how to swim. And here's the aspect of this, which is a little bit interesting. And it's curious to me why, as a community, we put so much emphasis on static floating. Because the reality behind the utility of it, or the application of floating, there isn't a lot. But it detracts a lot from confidence when we can't do it. And this is a new theory I'm thinking about right now. And so let's hop into this a little bit, if we could. So what I mean by utility is generally speaking, if we are in the pool, we are doing one of two things, right? We're there for recreation. We're enjoying maybe a cocktail, hanging out with friends or family, social, okay? Or we're using it for exercise and swimming laps, or, you know, maybe not quite to that extent, but certainly can still be using it for exercise. Rarely, or maybe the third case is, you know, we're training to learn how to do it so that we can go participate in scuba diving or, you know, free diving, snorkeling, that kind of thing for an upcoming vacation, or just like hanging out in the ocean, right? But rarely are we ever just like facing, floating and not moving. And kind of same on our back too, as far as like when you would actually utilize the skill that we're learning. But, and here's where I try to tie this all together, but when we're not able to do it, it certainly retracts from the confidence that an adult has, you might have at home, in learning how to swim, or the aspects of swimming that do have utility. Meaning, if you can't float, you tend to beat yourself up. If you beat yourself up, you're like, if I can't even float, there's no way I'm going to be able to swim. Even though it could not be further from the truth, because most of the time, believe it or not, static floating is harder to do, especially if you're muscular, than forward propulsion or swimming. And so it's, yeah, just an interesting thing that just kind of pops in my head there. You got anything? What do you think about that?
So I think that you're right in that there's no real utility to static floating. I feel like it's important in the beginning stages of the learn to swim process to be able to discover that you can float without then having to add all the pieces together. So it's a very foundational part, but then you move on from that.
So where do you think and hopefully I love this conversation. I think this is going to be very beneficial for people listening, but like, where do you think, you say it's foundational to learning, and I totally agree with you on that. It is foundational to learning, right? It's kind of like, well, you got to crawl before you walk. You got to walk before you run. You know, you got to run before you go play contact sports, or I don't know, whatever comes next. And this is kind of the crawling, maybe the walking, probably the walking aspect of that analogy. But what about the nuance when it detracts because you're not able to do it? Because when we don't have forward momentum, what you were saying earlier, our legs have a much harder time coming up to the surface. So if this is my head, these are my legs. You know, everyone thinks that a perfect front float is like this, when really it's not. It could be very much like this, where your head is up here, your legs are down here if they're dense because of muscle. What do you think about that, the psychological aspect of it detracting from the future learning?
Well, absolutely. You're going to lack confidence thinking that you're, you know, not buoyant, or that you're going to sink, or, you know, whatever those thoughts can come to be for not being able to do a perfect front float. Certainly it's not encouraging that you're, you know, highly capable, when that couldn't be further from the truth. And usually people try to fix it by adding in super hard, intense kick. And then you're getting into trying to get really granular on fixing technique because your legs keep sinking. Whereas if you were to just remain just as relaxed when you're front floating and your legs are sinking a little bit, and just add gentle forward propulsion, it just, then you're able to break through. I think a lot of people go at it kind of backwards. Yeah.
Interesting conversation. And I totally agree with what you're saying. And so I guess to put a bow on this one, if you struggle with floating, maybe it's okay. And that might not be necessarily an indicator of your ability to swim well when you're moving. Momentum can do great things, and the water is very helpful, especially to those of us with muscle. I say us like I'm included in that. But those of you at home that have a lot of muscle mass, the water is very, very friendly once we start moving as far as our muscle mass is concerned. But when it's just static, it's just like just very, very dense. So anyway, so we were in that video, we were breaking down how to help get your legs up to the surface to the extent that they can in our front float. And inside of that, we covered a couple of different things. We covered head position, we covered breath control, and what else? Relaxation.
Always relaxation.
Yeah. So, yeah, do you want to go into that? Or do you think it's a pretty fair explanation, just saying the foundation of...
Yeah, so the only way to know, like truly know, whether or not your legs are just a little higher in muscle to fat ratio, or when trying to do your front float, is to be 100% relaxed. Because otherwise it could be tension that is creating your legs to sink. And so that's really important to not just, glaze over. If your legs are still sinking, but you feel like you're not completely relaxed, or that you're kind of stiff, or flexed even, then we need to just stay where we are and get really comfortable with what we're doing. That's really important.
Yeah, well said. What about adults that would say, I am 100% relaxed? And let me rephrase. How do we know when we're 100% relaxed? Because one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of adults will come into the program, and specifically men, but it's not exclusively men, will say, I'm 100% relaxed. Oh yeah. And then they get in and they're like stiff as a board. Not necessarily saying all men have giant egos, but that tends to be an ego thing. Like, we shield ourselves from the sensitivity, whether that's a societal thing or not, who knows? Not part of this podcast, at least not today. But they'll come into the program and be like, yeah, I'm totally relaxed, when very clearly they're not, because they don't feel comfortable sharing that. So do you think it's just the process that we have to go through to ensure that we're relaxed? Or is there like a test an adult can do to know when they're fully relaxed? Like, what are your thoughts?
There's always going to be some physiological signs of not being relaxed. You can look for shallow breathing, any reactivity, just a general sense of reacting and needing to be in more control of what you're feeling. I don't know if I'm articulating.
Gosh, I wonder if I'm ever relaxed.
Me too.
Right? I think you are doing a good job articulating it. Yeah.
So yeah, just try to be exceptionally honest with yourself that you're not glazing over some things, or just like saying, oh, I can just push through it. Because that's where we hit roadblocks in the future, being that, okay, so maybe you'll be able to push through some anxiety and even use your forward momentum to power through. But you're just always going to be exhausted when you're swimming, and it's not going to be a safe and sustainable activity. And that is the goal of the information that we're putting out, is we want to take the difficulty out of the process of swimming.
Yep.
We want it to be sustainable and fun, and it doesn't have to be strokes.
And there's no awards being won for being the toughest in swimming. In fact, it's quite the opposite. All of the payoff is in just being in tune with yourself and knowing when you are brushing up against the areas that make you uncomfortable, being able to communicate that and ensuring that you're utilizing a practice of relaxation and meditation and breathing in order to help calm that down, desensitize the body, and begin working with the properties of water to help hold you up. And I don't want to go too far off course here, but I have used this term, and I think you did once too, systematic desensitization. And so I think this is a kind of a good spot to break that down a little bit and what we mean by you're kind of desensitized to the water. So, and I think the easiest way to describe desensitization, for me at least, is to think about the first time you ever turned on the news and there was something like tragic, or let's just say a shooting, like a mass shooting. Okay. And the first time you see that, you are glued to the television. Oh my gosh, how could this happen? I can't believe it. And not saying that you're not further down the road, but it's very gripping. And then you hear that same news story 7, 8, 9, 10 times in a day, right? And then the next day it comes back on and it's not quite as gripping. And you're like, oh yeah, I've seen this before. I've heard this before. And therefore you're not quite as glued to it.
Surprised or reactive.
There you go. Yeah, not as reactive. That's a great way to describe it.
Not that it makes it any, better in that subject for sure. But
it's how it's maybe not a great example.
Maybe, I don't know if anybody's ever, this is probably for the ladies out there that have ever tried waxing or like gotten your eyebrows waxed, right? Like the more you do it, it just starts to not hurt as bad. The more you get used to doing it. And so not that any pain is involved, certainly maybe emotional pain, trying to get through some fears in water, but
yeah, so that's the concept of desensitization. There's a number of it starts out with a very major impact, and as you continue to gain exposure to it, your body becomes desensitized and you start to relax more and more and more and more. And an easy way, and I'll let me get through this. I've got an idea of how I actually want to describe this. And so if you've ever been through learning how to swim before, let's say that you know how to swim and you're tuning in to learn how to swim better. One of the easiest ways to know that you're desensitizing is when the first time you ever put your face in the water, you are thinking about it that night, or the day before. You maybe lose some sleep. You come into the pool, you're like, I got to put my face in today. This is going to be really, really hard. You have anxiety, right? All the lead up to it. You get to the pool, you're thinking about it. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And then you put your face in the water. And fast forward 2 or 3 classes when you push off the wall and you're learning how to do forward propulsion. What is one step of that forward propulsion? Putting your face in. What aren't you thinking about when you're thinking about learning freestyle for the first time in forward propulsion? You're not thinking about taking that breath. You just take a deep breath and you put your face in. That's systematic desensitization. Your body is now transitioned that to automatic. And that is what we're going for from a process standpoint in everything that we do in the introductory phase of learning how to swim. We want to move it out of the presence in our brain of taking up a lot of real estate and move it more towards the automatic, fully relaxed section. So yeah, side note, I feel like that's explained.
Yeah.
Did you have more you wanted to add?
No, I just thought of another example, but we can hit on that another time.
Okay. Ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So outside of front floating, we also talked about back floating. Same thing. Only some of the aspects of back floating tend to be more egregious when you do them. For example, head position. When we're front floating and we lift our head up to maybe see where we're going, to get a breath, whatever it might be, the impact on the body from, let's just call it up and down in the water, there is impact. On a scale of 1 to 10, maybe it's a 3 or 4, right? It takes a minute for when you lift your head up for your body to adjust and you go down. But it's not major most of the time. However, when you're on your back and you lift your head up, most of the time we go from having our ears in the water to looking at our toes because we don't love the sensation of getting water in our ears. That has immediate impact. And on a scale of 1 to 10, it's closer to like an 8 or a 9. And it just immediately takes us out of our ability to keep our legs up. Our head weighs a lot, puts us a lot of pressure on the rest of our body. Whoop, down we go.
And it's pretty normal to also that students are also reacting to several of these things at the same time, right? So when we lift our head up and we feel our buoyancy change or our body position change and we didn't mean to make it change, then we're reacting to that as well. So the problem kind of snowballs unless we become aware of what it is through systematic desensitization, which we use in our course to just help take baby steps closer and closer to what the end goal is.
Yeah, I love that. And I think mindfulness, if you've ever done any meditation, really, really can help in this too. And one of the best ways I've heard that described is as a mindfulness exercise. And it's something that you should be including in your pre-swimming routine is think of it like a flashlight. Okay. What we want to do is shine light on certain areas of our body. So we're going to start and have awareness. We're shining the light, dark room. All we're thinking about is maybe our legs. And then we move them up our body. We start getting very familiar with being mindful of certain areas. And I lost my train of thought where exactly I was going. I hate it when that happens, but it's a great way to help support your relaxation and to bring awareness to what's going on and not react to that. So instead, mindfulness in your meditation, a great example is, let's say that you're learning how to front float and you're holding on to a wall. And then you start floating backwards away from the wall. All right. When we're not mindful, we react immediately. Oh, and that exacerbates the problem, right? This is tension in the body. We lose the oxygen in our lungs. We immediately react and start going down. The flashlight activity in mindfulness would say, okay, let's shine the light on the fact that my hands are drifting away from the wall. And let's make an observation as to what's happening instead of a reaction. In doing so, we don't take ourselves from a scary situation and put ourselves in a dangerous situation. Instead, we realize that, hey, maybe there's not so much to be scared of. And we allow ourselves the opportunity to then move out of that position without just strictly reacting to it. And that was my flashlight example.
Yeah, I love it. I love your flashlight example. But then it's also a lot of that fear and concern goes away. The reaction, like we're going to react, right? When we're systematically desensitizing ourselves out of reacting, it's what helps us not react is knowing that we know what to do next.
Yes.
And being able to think about that rather than all of the blood in the frontal cortex of your brain draining to go power your muscles because you think that you're about to drown, when in reality, if you know what to do next instead and be able to stay calm and level-headed, you know what to do next.
What to do next. Yeah. No, it's a great point. And so these are all aspects of learning how to swim that aren't covered a lot in other programs with other instructors. And we've touched on this a couple of times, but majority of the time when you're taking lessons at other programs, we're doing like a 90%, 95% technique, and maybe we'll be like, hey, relax. That's the 5% psychological, emotional step. Our program is the opposite. And if you can start to include breathing as a practice, meditation as a practice, awareness as a practice, mindfulness as a practice, then the practice of swimming and the outcome that you're looking for will happen much more naturally. It'll be much more enjoyable, and it will happen much more speedy. It'll be much faster. Speedily. I don't know if that's a word. Speedily.
Power, not force, right?
That's right. So, and then the final part that we talked about in that video was our forward propulsion and how a lot of the nuance of what trips us up in front floating and back floating really can not be quite so impactful when we start to insert forward propulsion, because the momentum factor and the physics behind that start to offset some of the other things.
And you need way less forward propulsion than anyone has ever told you.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
oh, yeah.
And I truly believe, and I think that strokes and those things have a time and a place, and if you want to learn them, awesome. But they shouldn't be the first thing that you learn when you're trying to propel yourself forward in the water.
Wait, isn't swimming strokes? No.
It is not.
No.
But yeah.
Did I make you lose your train of thought?
Well, no. Okay. So it's very important to learn how it feels to just do a simple movement down and figure out, getting comfortable with how your body glides through water, how like figuring out when you move like this, it does that. And it feels like, be curious, and get to know how you feel in the water. And then when you figure all of that out, start learning freestyle. But yeah, don't start learning freestyle until you figured out how to just glide naturally in a relaxed state of body and mind.
100%. Very, very well said. And most other programs try to layer on as much technique as possible. But the harsh reality here is this, and if you've taken nothing away from this episode, take this away, which is all of the world-class technique in the world, will not overcome density in the body and lack of relaxation.
Tension, stiffness.
It just won't. Michael Phelps could come in here himself and try to teach you, and it's not going to work.
It's just different. Like, it's the competitive swim industry is absolutely incredible at competitive swimming.
Yeah.
But this is different. It's
like golf and putt-putt.
Right.
We used that analogy yesterday, and I really, really like it the more I thought about it. I thought about it after the episode, and I was like, actually, that's really, really like that. Like, if someone was like, hey, I need to teach you how to golf. I need to teach you how to play putt-putt, right? And they show up with a driver. You're not going to be very good at putt-putt. And if you don't know how to do putt-putt, you're not going to be very good at general golf, because putting is a huge aspect of that. So you can't start in putt-putt with a driver, which is the driver in this example is like starting with strokes. We need to have the foundation of how to putt, what to do, how to make a read, how to have fun, how to relax and enjoy the experience, and not just put the ball on the tee and say, here's your driver, any mark it, set, go. You're not going to hit that ball straight.
Or at all.
Or it's going to go behind you. Best case scenario.
First time I ever tried to hit a golf ball, I got a lot of grass.
Oh yeah, big divots. You got to put those back.
Yeah, I feel bad for their yard.
Anyway, so we want to hear from you guys. How are you liking the content? How are you liking the pods? We are renaming our podcast our Swimcasts, and let me know what you think. If there's things you want to see more of, things that you don't like so much. Some of the feedback we've gotten is that some of the music has been a little loud, so we're trying to turn that down. But we are here for you, and we've been put on this earth, we believe, to help the world learn how to swim, and more so than that, develop a loving relationship with the water so we can transition the drowning data, which is completely out of control. And we intend to do that. And if there's anything that we can do to help facilitate that more for you, please let us know. It would be amiss without me saying we are in pre-sale right now for our Caribe Swim Learn to Swim 101 course, where you will learn how to swim 25 yards and get 4 fresh breaths guaranteed, or the program is completely free. We also have in October a destination learn how to swim experience in beautiful San Juan, Puerto Rico, at the El San Juan, which is one of the top resorts on the island, and where you will learn how to swim that same thing, 25 yards, 4 fresh breaths, guaranteed in 6 days, or that's free. And so there's a lot of opportunity here. Check out the link in the description below. You can find more information about the course in the description, the virtual course. You do have to go to caribeswim.com, CARIBE swim.com, to find out more information on the Destination Puerto Rico event. And like I said, if there's anything we can do to help serve you, please let me know. Otherwise, we will see you in another video later tonight, and certainly onward to tomorrow. Take care, my friends.